Hey everybody, welcome back for yet another one of Gramophone Live. I'm Luke, for those of you who don't already know, and tonight we're going to be talking about a really exciting new release from Sonus Faber. Really brilliant, gorgeous stuff. And joining me is none other than Will Kline, the warrior poet of hi-fi, the avatar of the oral. Welcome, Will.
Luke, how are you, sir? Good to see you.
I'm doing good, man. So this is really cool stuff. The new Homage line. And before we get into it, just thanks so much for taking some time to be here with us.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. Always love spending some time with you guys.
Oh, absolutely, man. We have a good time, don't we? We know how to have a good time.
I would say so.
All right, man. So for starters, let's do this. Can you give the viewers a little background about yourself with Sonus Faber, and even prior to that, your history with audio?
Yeah, absolutely. And funnily enough, my history with audio kind of starts with Sonus Faber. So the very first delve into hi-fi sales that I did was at a shop called Music Lovers Audio here in the Bay Area, California, and that was back in 2004. And they had been a Sonus Faber dealer really since the early 90s. So it was a company that had a lot of respect and association with the brand. So it was really one of the first high-end audio companies that I was introduced to at the beginning of my journey of audio, right? Which is absolutely mind-blowing to me that here I am on the manufacturing side, actually representing this company, which has come to be, and really from the very beginning, one of my very favorite companies in hi-fi on the planet. Right? When I first was introduced to Sonus Faber, there was a certain mystique, a certain romance that none of the other products that we carried really had.
Homage tradition, though. That's been a long-standing line, going all the way back to when you had that first experience with Sonus Faber. Am I correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, one of the first, full range floor standing speakers I ever heard in the hi-fi realm was the Amati Homage, the very first Amati, very first floor standing speaker actually from Sonus Faber. And even then, I mean, comparing it to everything else that was available at the time, there was a certain commanding solidity that the Amati had that very few other things in its price range had. It also had what Sonus Faber was known for, and that laid back, emotional, sweet type of sound, but really commanding and bombastic, for lack of a better term. And I think each iteration of the Amati since then has definitely built upon that, and albeit added a new sense of refinement, increase and improvement of overall detail and clarity of the product. But really that bombastic nature, that overwhelming emotional presence that the Amati had, it only continues to get better.
Oh, yeah. I remember the Amati prior to the generation we're just about to talk about. So the one that's outgoing now. That was my first experience with it. And it was definitely one of those products that grabbed your attention and was like, hey, this is hi-fi.
Yeah, well said. And it didn't hurt that it was absolutely gorgeous, right?
Oh, yeah. It's both sonically and to the eye, just everything you could really want. Yet somehow it seems you have managed to improve upon what we thought was perfection. So we'll get into the line and talk about each one. But first, what's the overall theme here with this new line?
Well, I'd like to actually read a quote, and this is actually available on our webpage, from Livio Cucuzza, our lead designer. And I think this really encaptures exactly what we're trying to do with this new product launch. And it goes, the most complex but also exciting moment for a designer is when he is called upon to improve a timeless icon. How do you innovate a product whose image is immune to the passage of time and the changing fashion trends? The only way is to take a step back, reflect, and deeply understand why that product was initially created. I faced this challenge straight on with my team at Sonus Faber. The third generation of Homage was the first product I worked on, and the latest launch we are unveiling is the fifth, the most evolved, the most mature, but equally authentic and special. A story that repeats itself, crossing the evolutionary path in different stages of my own life, never ceasing to fascinate me and make me proud to be a part of it. Right? I really don't think I could possibly sum it up better than that. Right? Not only is this something that represents what Sonus Faber always has been, right? but it represents our capabilities now. And in this particular project, we're implementing new processes, new techniques, new software, new engineering devices to really, really catapult us forward in terms of the amount of time it takes between having an idea, having a concept, something that's floating around Livio's head, to actually having something we can listen to in real life sitting in front of us that we can test and measure and improve. Right? That time window has never been shorter, which means the ideas themselves have never been more important, because we can actuate on things in a heartbeat. What used to take us 3-5 years of development, we can now do in 6 months with modern software and technique. So it's really an exciting time, because there are fewer restrictions now to what we're capable of creating than there ever has been. And you know, being able to go back to this really one of the most iconic speakers in the industry, in the Amati, and the entire family associated with it, and take what is truly the icon that represents Sonus Faber more than any other family that we make, and improve upon it so dramatically while still maintaining everything that we love about it. This isn't something that we could have done 10, 15 years ago, right? This requires cutting edge technology, brand new team members, and the growth that we've seen over the last 5 or 7 years.
And it makes sense, because you can have a master smith, but as his tools improve, so will he. And
Absolutely.
the best masters are still students, and they just become even more masterful.
That's it. That's it. And really, the key to that is remaining curious. It's remaining in touch with that original feeling that made you feel that the brand was special, right? And I can say, having met every single team member at the Sonus Faber factory at this point, they feel the same way I feel about it. They have that magic. They have that. They want to drive that forward. They want to grow that. They understand what is special and unique and magical about this brand. And they've become a part of that, and they've put themselves into it. And what we're seeing is a culmination of not just, you know, what the brand is capable of, but all of the love for the brand being reinvested back into the brand, and almost creating this multiplicative effect. Really, really excited about this year and the next coming years. Not just about this product launch, but some other things that we've got up our sleeve.
Oh, I'm sure. Though this is the one that, like, I was really hype about, because the Homage line, we know what it represents. Like, it's the big one. You know, the one that you can make either a killer, just incredible stereo experience, and it contains one of my most favorite center channels. And you know, I got a thing for really good center channels. But let's get into the pieces here. We've got a couple models. We've got the Amati, the Serafino, the Guarneri, and the Vox, which I have a bit of a soft spot for, because there just aren't many good centers, and the Vox is the gold
full range centers. Absolutely.
Exactly. But I guess let's start with the bookshelf and talk about the Guarneri, and then we'll go up from there. So with this model, what really can we expect performance-wise, especially over the outgoing one? What are some of the options for color that we get with this? And can you let us know about the price? And if this was your speaker, your setup, Will, what are some pairings you think you'd make with it?
Absolutely. Great questions. So let's start surface level. All right. So what we're seeing in terms of the aesthetic is a very similar finish and finish technique that we used with the Homage Tradition line. So we've kept the red violin finish. We've kept the Wenge finish. And of course, we've added the new graphite finish. All right. So graphite was always one of my favorites. This case, it's a little bit darker graphite than some of the models we've done in the past, but really, really beautiful. It has that high glass. It has that textural to it. You know, really, really is affected by sunlight, natural light in different ways. Very, very interesting finish on there. The other thing you'll notice is on the metal work, rather than going with the 90-degree edges, we actually softened the edges, both on the top and the bottom, to give it more of a kind of cohesive and aerodynamic look. And then as we go deeper, completely new bracing system and cabinet structure, right? So while the shape stayed exactly the same, internally there is nothing the same about it, right? Brand new bracing that we've used countless hours of software to be able to you know, theorize about where the best possible places would be to brace the speaker internally, to place the ports, the driver placement, all of the different configurations in the physical domain have been reimagined, right? And what we've come to is a slight bit of refinement in terms of location, and a significant overhaul in terms of the internal bracing structure, the skeleton of the speaker. The way that we're using the porting system is dramatically different from the previous generation, where before we were separating out the drivers into different porting systems. We now essentially are using the entire cabinet as the acoustical chamber for the lowest two drivers. This has actually gotten us a dramatic increase in overall bass output and extension. As we go a little bit deeper, there's some new technologies involved in the internal structure of the cabinet. We can talk about some of those, but the drivers themselves have been completely redesigned from the ground up. In fact, the woofer on the Amati is something worth noting. We're now using a dual voice coil driver, right, for both of the bass woofers on the Amati.
Nice.
So now we've got more control, we've got more extension, we've got the ability to handle higher levels of power. And one of the things that I discovered upon debuting these is the ability to drive much larger spaces than one would imagine a speaker that size is capable of, right? So where you would have needed, you know, a large, you know, 7-foot speaker to be able to fill a given space, the Amati is now capable of giving us nice, well-rounded, well-controlled low-frequency extension, even in very large rooms, right, which is pretty unique for a speaker in its size characteristic. So we've got new cabinet structure, we've got new porting system, we've got new drivers, and of course, tying it all together is a new crossover network. Now, crossovers have always been an obsession for Sonus Faber, and there are two driving philosophies behind the two unique crossover circuits that we make today. One is called paracross topology. The idea behind paracross topology is essentially that is a semi-balanced circuit design, which uses common mode rejection such that any noise that is introduced into the system along the way is canceled out before it has a chance to get into the driver system itself and recreate sound. So it's one of the quietest crossover networks on Earth. It does incredibly well with high dynamic range, high power handling. Right, but we also have another crossover network that we've developed, and this one's called internal fusion filtering. Now, the difference with internal fusion filtering, it's a complete series design, and in fact, a very, very simplistic circuit layout. And there's an old adage in audio engineering that the simplest circuits yield the best results. Right?
Yeah, I found that to be true.
Yeah, and in my experience as well, the idea is the more components you put in there, what we call the jelly bean parts, your resistors, your transistors, your capacitors, your diodes, the more of them that are in the circuit, the more that they have a chance to interfere with the signal, right? So we want to make these circuits as simple as possible. So in creating the new Homage, what we did is we combined the best parts of the internal fusion filter and combined them with the paracross topology, such that in the multi-way models, the Serafino and the Amati, we have the lower frequency registers being completely handled by paracross topology. So we've got the benefit of noise cancellation. We've got the benefit of being able to deal with a great deal of power and high dynamic range. And then on the mid-range to tweeter crossover, we actually use the IFF. Now, sonically, the internal fusion filter has a little bit more of the characteristics that one would expect from a nice tube amplifier, for instance. It's a little bit more holographic sounding. There's more detail and presence and more immediacy in the sound. All right. So being able to tie these two together, and in fact, when we're talking about the Guarneri, we actually have them together in one single crossover circuit, right? We're able to implement these two technologies together in one circuit. But the idea is we get the great holographic imagery. We get that great detail preservation and almost ethereal imagery. And at the same time, it'll handle absolutely any type of music, absolutely any amplifier, with great high dynamic range, and really be able to properly present the layers of information without things getting kind of jumbled together.
Yeah, I got to say, having been able to actually join you and check out those Amatis a little while back, and now that we have the Serafinos here, one thing I've noticed about the new range that's really impressive and just really did it for me. Now, this is personal opinion, but still. Thinking about the old range, there was never anything that Sonus Faber was bad at, but things that it was maybe better at than some others. But this new range is definitely across all just much better rounded.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And a lot of that is not just about the innovative new technology that we've got at our disposal, the designs that we've been working on for almost 40 years now in terms of driver and driver materials. but a lot of it is just recalibrating the balance of the things that are already good. It's amazing just kind of going through and figuring out what are the weakest points in this, already strong product line. And just by filling in those gaps and kind of replacing the weaker links, we've already gotten significant improvement. Now, add to that our brand new capabilities that we've never had before, right? And yeah, I'm really excited to get some ears in front of these products because I think people are going to be absolutely blown away. And I think there's anybody out there that have certain certain hesitations with Sonus Faber because of a certain characteristic that they might have sonically, I would definitely invite you to take a listen to the new Homage. I think you might find that some of the things that you found were missing have not only been well compensated for, but everything else has improved as well in terms of the overall sound quality.
Absolutely. I think the one that jumped out to me maybe the most is just sheer dynamism. And then on top of that, take the Sonus Faber very romanced sounding mid-range that we love, but also make it just quite simply clearer and even maybe bring it back slightly closer to accuracy. Yet, it still keeps that sugar on top, but there's just something there that is more real, more accurate.
Absolutely. We were talking about crossovers earlier, and being able to reduce the overall component count in a crossover is beneficial. So that kind of segues into a brand new technology. This is a new patented technology that we've developed. Much like, and we've had discussions about our damped apex dome tweeter, right?
Oh, yeah.
And once you understand how the DAD works, it just makes it seem like every other soft dome tweeter is broken, right? By comparison, right?
I almost
and what
cannot
always
agree
gets
more.
me about it is how simple an idea it is, but that we were able to patent it and make sure that nobody else is allowed to use that technology, right? Huge advantage for us, almost unfair advantage for us, because it really is what I believe to be the best way to make a soft dome tweeter. Now, there's another technology, and this is called Intono. And this may only appeal to nerds. It may not necessarily be something that your average consumer is at all interested in, but I love it. I eat this stuff up, right? So this is a brand new novel technology that no one's ever figured out before. And it's a very, very simple concept, almost so simple that I'm really surprised no one else has been able to figure it out and patent it before. But this is Intono. So what we do is, as you know, we've got separate chambers for each of the mid-range drivers in our collection and a separate chamber for the tweeter. All right, this has the advantage of making sure that we have the proper acoustic loading for the mid-range driver, and that it's separated from any of the turbulence that would be created from the lower drivers in the complement, and that its noise is separated from the tweeter. We also like to encase our tweeter not just in its own rear labyrinth to prevent sound and air leakage, but also in its own separate subchamber, so that no high-frequency energy can leak anywhere else in the system and find its way out of the ports or find its way out of some of the other drivers. There are major advantages to using this, and we've experimented with many different iterations of it and found that it's absolutely an improvement over the alternative. The problem with a sealed enclosure, and this is true about absolutely any sealed enclosure that is capable of supporting a driver that does anything below, let's say, 200 hertz, right, is pressure. Right. As you have a sealed enclosure, you're going to reach a certain frequency where the pressure will build up inside of that sub enclosure. Right. Now, in most cases, in most ported designs, or most speaker designs, and certainly what we do in our cabinets, is we port the system. All right, and there's a lot of misunderstanding about what a port is. In its most simple terms, it's described as a hole in the speaker that allows the driver to move unimpeded. Right, so it allows air to go in and out of the chamber of the speaker, in order to allow the driver greater motion and less mechanical impedance. Right, this is sort of true, but it's not really why ported systems are desirable. The idea behind a ported system is essentially the pocket of air that is sitting inside of the port while the driver is active works as a passive radiator to move more air outside of the speaker. So with the same energy moving that one driver, you're now moving two surfaces that are moving air, right? So a ported system makes a speaker more efficient. It gives you lower frequency extension. It gives you more bass. But there's something called port tuning, because at some point, just like if you have a Newton's pendulum, right, at some point, the energy coming from the driver and the energy coming from the pocket of air inside of the port will actually neutralize each other, and they will essentially be smacking off each other, right? This will give you cancellation. So suddenly you've got no bass at a particular frequency range, right? In a ported system, this is a problem, and it's a problem that we figure out by ranging the ports, by the port location, by the overall tuning of the port to make sure, ideally, that the tuning of the port is underneath human hearing, right? Below that 20 hertz threshold. Now, when we're talking about a mid-range sealed enclosure, there's no way really to tune it properly so that it's going to be outside of the range of human hearing, right? But we know that it has an advantage, that having a dedicated subchamber for a mid-range driver has an advantage. So how do we deal with the pressure buildup in the mid-range driver, or in that pocket of space, the acoustic loading behind the mid-range driver, right, as it reaches the frequencies where that pressure builds up the most? Because when you build up that pocket of air pressure, it actually mechanically impedes the motion of the mid-range driver. And the amplifier then has a greater load that it has to push to get that driver to move the same distance. So this mechanical impedance translates directly to electrical impedance in your amplifier. Right now, what a lot of manufacturers will do this, and certainly what we do in some of our other models, is we will create some sort of an impedance notch filter in the crossover, such that when we hit that frequency range where we've got maximum pressure buildup in the subchamber, right, the crossover allows the amplifier more power throughput, so it drives that load with greater power, thereby seeing, for lack of a different way to describe it, but essentially what you're doing is compensating for the greater power usage that you need to move the driver the same amount in that high pressure environment, right? So hopefully that all makes sense, because that's just the foundation. Right? So here's how Intono works. Intono uses the property of a failing port, right? The point at which, the frequency at which the port is no longer vibrating air back and forth, but just opens up, right? It uses that frequency at the exact frequency where the driver builds up the maximum impedance pressure, right? Impedance resistance, right? Or I'm sorry, pressure impedance, mechanical impedance. So what's happening is we're basically using the failure point of an existing technology added to the subchamber that we make for our mid-range driver, and we're unloading that pressure into the other subchamber that contains the tweeter. Now, the tweeter doesn't care about this pressure buildup because it has its own rear labyrinth, right? So that controls air pressure and any sound that would escape or get into it, right? So essentially, we used existing technologies that we have, innovated a new novel way to use a porting system, and created something that allows us to control that impedance spike that we would normally have to compensate for in the crossover circuitry. It allows us to do that in the physical analog domain, right? This means we can use far fewer parts in our crossover, and we get a much smoother overall impedance, which is going to translate to a much more open overall sonic signature. It also means that sonically, we're actually getting a much better transition point between the tweeter and the mid-range, which means more cohesion, which means more presence, more three-dimensionality, and more of that realistic sound staging effect. So hopefully that's not too complicated, because I know there's a lot to it, but the fact that we're still inventing ways to make our existing systems better, and that the ways are so novel that we're actually able to patent them and add them to our long line of array of unique patents now, it's mind-blowing to me. I can't believe that we're still able to innovate at this level, this far into speaker production as human beings. It's crazy.
It's wild. Like when you and I got to see those new Amatis, it was just my first question. I think you were there when I said it, was just how? Like, how did this become more? Like, I thought we were there already.
Yes, you never know it could be better until it gets better.
but hearing you break it down, I mean, it makes sense. Like with the Intono system, you're making a change closer to the transducer. You take that out of the crossover, boom, automatically going to be more natural.
Exactly. Yeah, we're trying to do as much as we possibly can in the physical domain. And it's strange that it's actually the software, right? It's literally the opposite of the physical domain. It's really the virtual world where we're making the most leaps and strides in the physical domain, right? Because what would have taken us years and years of experimentation, reforming, 3D printing, trying it, testing it, refining it, we can do virtually now. It's really, really insane. And then basically just compare the results and make sure that our ears are telling us everything that's that they're supposed to.
Yeah, having done computers before doing audio, I can tell you in the last decade, what they are now doing with modeling is getting almost scary. Like there are
Absolutely.
models that
The
really
computers know more about the
understand.
world than we do.
Yeah, like these models, they really understand how physics works. And like you said, what was it, 5 years R&D down to 6 months worth of the same amount?
It's
Like
really
crazy.
startling. It's really startling. And yeah, not just for our industry. I'm really excited to see what happens in aerospace, for instance, or,
Oh my
automotive,
gosh, yeah.
for instance, with all of these new innovations. But being able to really, and, the key to it for us was not trying to reinvent the wheel. So we wanted to make sure that we're using the very best software that's out there, the very best modeling that's out there. And we also wanted to make sure that we hired the best people at working with that software, right? Because we don't want to have to go through the whole iteration and that whole learning curve ourselves. So we basically just formed like Voltron and just attached the pieces that we needed to make us even a bigger juggernaut.
I love the Voltron reference. So with the new lines, we're seeing, even from the outside, there's a couple things that we can recognize. Not just the fact that the cabinetry is still beautiful and yet somehow improved itself in little nuanced ways that set it apart. But one of the first things that jumps out to me when I look at any of the new product line is in the mid-range, that new phase plug, or in the bass drivers, how the dust cover looks all beefed up now.
Yes, so definitely want to talk about the phase plug. And this is actually the result of some really sophisticated modeling software. And it's almost discovered by mistake. It was basically we were trying to derive what would be the optimal shape for a phase plug. And as you know, a phase plug is basically a static section of a mid-range driver, right? So it's the part that the diaphragm is not connected to the diaphragm. The advantage of using a phase plug is just like in a damped apex dome tweeter, the most egregious part of a given cone-shaped driver is going to be the center of that cone. That's the part that has the greatest time delay between the rest of the driver and the listener, and that's the part where you can actually generate distortion through wave cancellation and reflection. So it makes sense to not have a moving active part of the driver there. So phase plugs are almost always superior to the alternatives. All we were trying to determine is, in terms of a waveguide, is it better to have a convex curve, a concave curve, or a completely flat phase plug, right? And when we entered the information into the computer, essentially it came back with this shape that you see on your screen here, all right? This almost kind of mushroom type of shape. So essentially it's adding distance to the phase plug and actually interfering with the waveforms themselves, right? So now we're looking at it, and we look at it, and we look at the overall propagation of the waveforms, and you actually look at the consistency of the waveforms at listening distances, right? Say 2 meters or more. And this interference pattern that this phase plug is creating is actually reforming the waves such that they are more accurate and more consistent at a distance, all right, which is mind-blowing to me. So essentially, we're taking the most important frequencies in the mid-range, and we're refolding them onto themselves such that they separate better at a distance, and they create a more consistent overall propagation shape. So this allows a listener to not only have better clarity, better detail, better sense of space and 3 dimensions in the mid-ranges, but it also allows for multiple listeners in a given room to have generally the same overall output in that mid-range, to have the same presentation, the same relative sound staging. So it's really, really innovative, and it's immediately noticeable. It was actually one of the things comparing the Amati tradition, for instance, to the new Amati Gen 5 is the immediacy and the way that even the mid-range frequencies seem to attack you and seem to have this physical presence that you can feel on your face, right? It's really unique, and certainly not like anything that I've heard in audio. So you can see the new phase plugs. It not only gives us better linearization across the board, so you're looking at a flatter frequency response and a more consistent frequency response from multiple places in the room. But these are also the types of things that will make the speaker easier to place. It will make it so that there are more rooms where you will find that you can get the speaker to work in. Right? And of course, this technology is specific to the Vox, the Amati, and the Serafino.
Now, with with the bookshelf, and I know a little bit about why this is, but for our viewers, why no phase plug?
So in the case of the two-way speaker, we're actually not using a mid-range driver. All right, so phase plug is appropriate for mid-range. What we're using in that is a mid-woofer because, of course, those two drivers are also responsible for the low frequency extension there as well. And in terms of low frequency, you can't fake the physics, I always say, right? So you want to have as much contact with the air as possible, right? And because we're dealing with frequencies that are, of course, lower, the distance of those waveforms are much greater, and any of the interference patterns that we generate at the center of that cone are basically mitigated by the length of waves that we're dealing with, right? So it's
Just
much
base
less
behaves
problematic.
differently.
Exactly.
Makes sense.
So yeah, essentially the difference is that this driver is also responsible for bass, so it's been optimized to move as much air as possible.
Back to the mid driver though with the phase plug, and then we'll move on from there. That's the thing that I think all of it is so improved, but that's the thing that really gets me, because when you and I were listening to these, or at least my first time experiencing them, all of that warm, buttered up Sonus Faber mid range was still there, but it was just somehow all of that goodness, but more intelligible, more clear, better presented. Like that information was just being delivered to you just better. Because one thing I've learned a little bit about speakers is so much of clarity and intelligibility, or just that feeling that it's right, it's natural, it's as if it's in the room, has to do with time and how that wave is propagating. And that's precisely what you described in the design of the phase plug, a lot
Absolutely.
with time and propagation.
Yeah, timing is everything. When it comes down to it, often when you'll hear something about a speaker, especially in the high frequencies, that is off-putting. Oftentimes, it's not necessarily about the allotment of frequencies. It's not about the frequency curve. It's about the timing relationship. Often, the timing relationship between different drivers in the system. Of course, timing relationship between first increments and reflection points can also, the room itself can also add to that effect. But we have found that in terms of what we're known for, which is long-term listenability, natural sound reproduction, timing is as, if not more important than frequency, right? So we do
Agreed.
everything in our power to optimize the timing increment, to make sure that on that x-axis, on that timing domain, we're being as accurate as we possibly can, and really focusing on the listener, really focusing on the location of the listener relative to the speaker's distance and location in a given room, right? As you know, Sonus Faber speakers are not designed to be used in anechoic chambers, right? They're not designed to be used in completely dead spaces, right? We want you to use these in your living room, in your life, in your place that you live. And a lot of times there's going to be reflective surfaces, there's going to be bright walls. We expect there to be a certain percentage of drywall or lath and plaster or plywood, right? These reflective type of surfaces. So in order to maintain the proper characteristics, it's much, much, much more important for us to make sure that the timing is on, because the timing affects all frequencies in all environments, right? Add to that our absolutely steadfast obsession with the mechanism of human hearing, right? We have almost no concern whatsoever how a computer reacts to listening to our speakers. We have almost no concern whatsoever how our speakers sound in an anechoic chamber, right? The testing and measurement is just the starting point, all right? Being able to have a flat frequency response, being able to have proper phase information, that's all a given. Of course you have to have that, all right? But the real test is done with human hearing. And human hearing itself still requires more study, right? We're still not 100% there yet. The idea of how much of our brain is actually dedicated to listening and how that apparatus works, it's not nearly as consistent and linear as people think. Right. So being able to concentrate on, focus on the things that the most number of people, that the greatest amount of people are sensitive to in their listening is something that's really been a key to Sonus Faber's success. We're not just making speakers that sound as perfect as possible. We're making speakers that sound as perfect as possible to human hearing.
Oh yeah, and the thing, it's been said, it'll be said, and it'll keep being said. The thing about the human ear is just Yeah, the ear itself is already a marvel, but really just what our brain does to understand heard information, much like it does for anything else, is like it's a miracle we take for granted.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, it's always that question, like if you had to lose one of your senses, which one would you be willing to let go? Right? And I'm a vision guy. I love vision, but the ears are certainly magical, you know. And when you think about like your concept of magic as a kid, you know, being able to render something out of thin air, for instance, pull a rabbit out of a hat, for instance, uh, as we become older, you know, all of those things just kind of wear away. It's like, oh, that's not really magic. There really is no Santa Claus. Sorry, kids. The Easter Bunny's not real, right? All of these things just kind of fall away, and all the magic in our lives just kind of drifts away, right? And we don't get to enjoy that. We don't get to have that feeling of having magic incorporated in our life. And I think that's really important. And I think for me, certainly, high-end audio is kind of the last refuge. It's the last refuge for real magic, because when you listen to a really, really well set up, well rendered stereo image, and everything in the room is active and everything's lit up, and you can hear every single instrument, and none of it seems to be coming from the speakers, that's as close to magic as I have ever experienced in my life, and that is a really, really powerful feeling. So we concentrate on that, right, on making that magic. And there's lots of tools that we have at our disposal. In fact, one of the things about this particular line that we decided to do is we figure that in the Homage levels, we shouldn't necessarily, especially with our partner company being Macintosh, you shouldn't necessarily have to worry about having enough power to drive the speakers. All right, and any of these speakers will respond on as little as 60 or 80 watts, but I always recommend, you know, going to the maximum allotment. You know, something like 350, 400 watts on the Amati, for instance, would be a starting point for me on a high quality amplifier. As such, we've actually modified all the models in this lineup so that they're 100% polar correct and phase coherent. All right, which means when the speaker sees a signal, every single driver in that full range signal will activate exactly the same, at the same polarity, in the same phase. What a lot of speaker manufacturers will do, and even some of us, and even some of our entry-level models, is they will actually reverse, let's say, the mid-range driver in polarity, and then feed it a signal that's 180 degrees out of phase. So essentially, you're hearing the same thing, but the amplifier is never seeing the load of all of those drivers simultaneously. So it makes it easier for your amplifier to drive, right? And we figure with when we're getting up to the level of the Homage, you should have a high quality amplifier. It should be something that has a rock solid power source and is really capable of driving the speaker without fluttering. So if everybody's got a good amplifier, we don't have to worry about that. So we can actually take advantage of the sonic benefits of making sure that all the drivers are perfectly in phase and perfectly polar correct. Right? And that was one of the things that I noticed the most when we did our demonstration in Dallas when we were there, is the immediacy, the impact that you feel, not just in the bass. We all know what bass impact feels like, right? You can feel it through your feet, you can feel it in your stomach, right? But that mid-range impact, where instruments that were floating right there, you could feel the air vibrating your face when they hit that attack, right? That's something I've never experienced before. It's really, really eerie and felt more present and emotional and real, you know? It was really, really
Oh,
interesting.
mid-range speed is like make or break for me. And to see how these have elevated that actually a lot, because maybe my only criticism of the older ones would be for like certain electronic or hip hop. Okay, maybe they could move just a little quicker, but now
Right.
these absolutely do. And now they're doing it with that speed you need, yet with that Sonus Faber romance, and it's just all the better.
Absolutely. And yeah, having that, you know, that immediacy, that speed, that proper timing, all of those characteristics, it not only allows you to get a greater sense of impact, right? Fill the space better and more consistently. It really translates into very subtle textural details, like the overtones on the middle C of a guitar, for instance, right? Those those really tiny details, those low-level details that allow your hearing and your subconscious to really associate the sound you're hearing with a real source of information, with a real instrument or a real singer, right? That sense of reality is so dependent on the very, very low level signals. Oftentimes, our subconscious is picking that up and we're not even actively listening to them, right? But having that speed and having that proper timing allows the speaker to convey that information much, much more accurately and much more closely to what it would be like in real life. So it just presents a sense of presence, right, for lack of a better term, that you know, certainly the family and perhaps even the brand has never really done before.
Oh yeah, it's guys, you just have to hear
You just have to hear it.
it. All right, man. Let's talk about each of the things in the series. Now we've talked about some of the details of each one, but with the bookshelf, what would you be some good pairings for that? What kind of pricing are we going to expect with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So something like the Guarneri, it's more about the refinement of the amplifier than the amount of power that you're pushing. For instance, on a pure Class A, a really nice amplifier, you could get these things going on 20 watts and it would be more power than you'd ever need, right? So they're very efficient, but they like additional power. So I always recommend something of high quality to pair that up with. Now, if I was looking at something from our offering, certainly any of the Michi integrateds would be fantastic.
Oh
Any
yeah,
of the
power
Macintosh
for days.
integrateds, especially their hybrid integrateds. I'm really a fan of that combination, right? Where you've got the Class D back end with the tube front end on their integrateds. Something like that paired up with the Guarneri makes an amazing combination. It's really magical because you do get that speed and that accuracy from that Class D, and you still get this great ethereal warmth from the tube section. It's really beautiful amp.
Tubes in Class D are actually shocking because Class D is breakneck fast, but sometimes sterile. Well, put tubes in front of it, and that's gone.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. It really is the best of both worlds, and it's kind of the best way to use both of those technologies. So it works out great. Yeah, I love all the hybrid amps that Max makes right now are absolutely killing it in terms of sound quality. Some of the best in the world, if not the best in the world, in the price category.
Been some of the most popular for our customers too. So it's just proofs of the pudding.
It's just value just all day. It's really impressive. So yeah, any of those, and of course any of the Class A, B, you know, they're standard integrated amplifiers. Those are all going to have well over the power needed to get the Guarneri going. But really more importantly, again, the refinement, the detail, the clarity, the quiet noise floor that can really make these things shine.
Oh, absolutely. And I would imagine just from having demoed plenty of Mac on the floor here, okay, the Guarneri and probably like a Mac 7200 if you're being a little price conscious is still going to be killer.
Absolutely. That system will do anything you throw at it and never even flinch.
Oh yeah, that would be an awesome combo. Yeah, we should put that in the showroom.
Yeah, we'll listen to that actually next time I'm down there.
Talking about the Serafino then, what would you do? Give me pricing on Serafino, and then what would you probably do with something like that?
Oh, yeah. So the Guarneri
did we mention
comes
pricing
with
on
the
Guarneri,
stand.
by the
We
way?
did not. The Guarneri comes with the stand at $19,000 for the pair. Moving up to the
With
Serafino,
stand.
we're looking at, yep, and yeah, that has beautiful, you know, curved, almost you know, aquatic carbon fiber stand on that. It's gorgeous. So yeah, moving up to the Serafino, you're looking at $26,000 for the pair on that. And that is the point where I would definitely recommend going with separates, having a separate stereo amplifier. Although there are certainly, you know, some great, especially in the Macintosh range, but even the Rotel Michi stuff, some great, really powerful integrated amplifiers that would have no problem grabbing a hold of that speaker. In terms of the level of detail, the refinement, your capability to upgrade the system and move through it, for me, the Serafino really represents the starting point at a truly, truly high-end, have it for the rest of your life type system, right? And as such, I will always recommend going with separated components for that type of a system. And of course, there's the advantage there, as you and your customers know, when something new comes along and you need some sort of a new digital to analog component or some new volume control or some new format that needs to be implemented, having a separate component system means you only ever have to replace one of those components to upgrade to whatever the latest format is, right? So it's a system that will grow with you and stay with you for the rest of your life. And the Serafino is very much a speaker that definitely meets those characteristics. So I think it's rated around 300 watts. I have to double check. But yeah, I would definitely say somewhere in their neighborhood of 300 watts of good, clean power would be a starting point for the Serafino. Anything above that would probably be recommended. And again, as long as you're using clean power, you know, any one of these speakers can be paired with amplifiers well above the rated wattage, so long as you're being careful. And you will absolutely hear the improved results of the improvements of the characteristics of that amplifier every step of the way, all the way to the very top.
Oh yeah, and to your point about upgradability, Though it's funny, the last couple of years have been a bit of a challenge to what I'm about to say, but I'm sure it will smooth over again. Until just recently, amps kind of were status quo for a long time. It's only just recently we've seen some serious advancements in Class D and a handful of other things that are challenging that a little bit now. But for the past 20 years, going back even just 5 years ago and then 20 years back from that, it was like a really good Class AB amp was that. From there, just get a better DAC, get a better preamp.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. But I would say over the last 5 years or so, major improvements.
Oh yeah, amps. We've entered into a period of innovation with amps as well, but there was a time where they just kind of chilled.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The
right,
obviously the touch point that I have is with Macintosh, and one of the best comparisons that I would say if somebody wants to take a listen to how amplifiers in general, but certainly in the Mac lineup, have improved over the years. Listen to the old Macintosh MC 1.2 kW, and then listen to the new Macintosh 1.25 kW.
That's a good example.
The differences are not subtle, right? Not at all. And the 1.2 is never a bad amplifier, but the 1.2 is so much faster, so much quicker on its feet, so much more open. And, it has a sense of clarity and emotional throughput that no other previous generation model had. So
it
it's really
definitely
a significant improvement.
Mac has a certain sound that they go for, and for good reason. But one thing about the 1.25, there's a handful of things in Mac's lineup that do this, and it's one of them. It definitely gets a little closer to just outright transparency because it's expecting you to have the speaker to match.
Exactly. Yep. Couldn't have said it better myself. It's probably the most transparent amplifier I've ever heard.
Oh, it's up there. I mean, heck, when we were listening to the Amati 1.25 combo, that's in one of my top 3 listening experiences in my entire life. And I've been to shows and all that stuff, but that Mac new Amati combo.
Yes.
Enough said.
That'll do.
We had way too much fun, didn't we?
We usually do.
And speaking of Amatis, let's talk about Amatis. What are we going to look like for pricing on the new Amati? And
yeah, so we're revisiting.
What kind of system are we putting together for that? I mean, it probably is the one
absolutely. You already got my recommendation, right? You just mentioned it. So yeah, we are revisiting a price point that we've actually been at in the past with the Futura, $36,000 for the pair. So we're still a little bit more than the previous generation, still well under where the Il Cremonese. It's still very relatively well priced in terms of what else is out there in the market. Of course, with Sonus Faber, we always plan to keep these families in production for at least 5 or 7 years when we're looking at this level, which means we've got to have the engineering and the pricing such that this will continue to be one of the best sounding speakers on planet Earth 7 years from now in its price category. All right, so it goes without saying that we honestly believe that at the $36,000 price point, honestly anywhere between 30 and 40, there is nothing on the planet that touches this sound quality.
I got to be careful with this, but there's some other things I've heard in that category, and you're right. Like what Sonus Faber has done here has made sure that they are an entire good foot's length above what everyone else I think is doing there right now.
Yeah, that's our job. And, it's been great having families of product that we have kind of gone through these exercises of making sure that we can improve them to a certain level, a certain threshold to make sure that we don't have to go back and redo things 3 years later, 4 years later. And I think the Olympica Nova is a really good example of being able to nail it. Even at this point, years and years after launch, it still continues to not only be competitive, but what many reviewers consider the best sounding speaker in the category. So yeah, we plan to do the exact same thing here in this price category.
Oh, I can tell you in the mid teens category, orbiting around $15,000 is about the middle for the Olympica Nova. In our showrooms, it's slaughtering at that price point.
I have yet to hear about it.
It's no contest. So yeah, it's whenever Sonus Faber drops a line in a certain category and they do this update like you've done right now, the dominance hangs around for a few years.
Yeah, we have no reason to play games anymore. So yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, I am an owner of the Olympica Nova 5, but only because we've decided to make sure the allotment of new Amatis goes to all of our dealers and customers first before we're allowed to get them. But I will absolutely be purchasing a new pair of Amatis for myself. I am in love.
Oh gosh, yeah, I can see myself making some questionable financial decisions in a few years.
I can see it in your eyes, Luke. Let's get you a pair.
But let's finish up and talk about the Vox, and then we actually have some really awesome questions that came in, and I am quite impressed with the quality of some of these, so I'm
Beautiful.
excited to
I love
talk to you guys.
questions.
With the Vox, what are we going to be looking at for pricing there? And I've alluded to it, but let's try to put it into words just briefly why this is a special speaker. Because when we generally think about center channels, those of us who have been in hi-fi, there isn't much to get excited about. But the Vox is the exception.
Yes. So the Vox will be a little bit delayed production. We'll start to see that trickle out in the next couple of months here. We've already got, for the record, we've already, so just so everybody knows out there, there are some dealers, you guys included, that actually have the Amati, the Serafino, and or the Guarneri currently ready and available for listening. All right. And over the next couple of weeks, we expect most of our dealers to bring these in. So we want to make sure that everybody's got a chance to get somewhere and take a listen to them. So you're looking at 17,000 for the Vox, and the great thing about the Vox is not only is it perfectly sonically matched to basically the aggregate of the Amati and the Serafino, right? So you're going to get a perfect, transition from your center channel to left and right when you're using that. It is as full range of a center channel as is on the market in this price category. Right. So we really try to make sure that the overall frequency allotment is as close to the Serafino as possible. And then, of course, the Vox adds an additional mid-range driver. So it doesn't have to work as hard to be able to fill overall theater spaces. Now, when we're dealing with theater, and this is a characteristic that all of our speakers, from the very, very entry level to our very, very maximum flagships, have at this point, when you're dealing with a reference level theater, right? Reference level theater requires volume levels at peak at 125 decibels at the listening position. Right. So this is a criteria by which we measure all of our speakers. We have to make sure that we can do that in order to properly create a theater. The problem with most center channels is when you have that level of amplitude in one single box, right, that's responsible for almost the full range of frequency, there tends to be hot spots, right? There tends to be places where you're getting lots of high frequency information, certain places where you're not getting so much, certain places where the mid range is canceling out. So what we did is we tried to optimize this particular rendition of the Vox using the new drivers that we have, using the new technology, using a double shot of the Intono technology, because we're actually using two mid-range drivers here, and really just make sure that we can handle as much power is required for reference level theaters without ever breaking the perfect sonic matching between the rest of the speaker, the rest of the lineup, and the center channel. So I think we've got that balance better than we ever have before. So everything we loved about the Vox, the fact that it does have this amazing clarity, this amazing detail, and this great sense of presence and being able to perfectly meld with the other speakers in the soundstage. But it also has a consistency throughout the room that is really, really beneficial for theater.
Oh yeah, nailing that timbre matching is always a challenge for any manufacturer in home theater, and like you said, not many really accomplish it, let alone having the output or frequency range that you need to ensure that that can be done. The thing that gets me about the Vox, because I'm someone who has just such a nigh equal balance of enjoying music and enjoying, whether it's TV, movies, multi-channel content, right?
Mm-hmm.
Two-channel to multi-channel, almost even balance of just what I enjoy. Basically, if it can be hi-fi, no matter what the category is, if it can just be better, clearer, truer, sign me up. And I have a lot of customers that are like that too. So like, imagine the thing with the Vox, guys, that I hope that you can grasp here. We often watch movies, we watch them on TV, we go to a theater, and it's not that it isn't awesome, but you can probably, if you really think about it, pick out instances where that actor, that actress just didn't quite sound the way you know them to sound. Think about anyone who's been on screen, who has an incredible vocal performance and their acting ability. And just what if you could really get that perfect? Every word they say. That's what the Vox does.
Yeah, well said. I mean, the ability to stand the hairs up on the back of your neck when you're listening to the news is
Yeah.
pretty exceptional, right?
Let
Any
alone what
voices, any
happens
sound,
when
it just feels like it's right there with you. It's eerie.
let alone what happens when you get the likes of Morgan Freeman on your screen, just focused on him.
Absolutely. And you know, it's interesting because it's sad. So many Americans, their reference point for a fine audio system, unfortunately, is their local movie theater. Right.
Yeah.
And the criteria by which movie theater sound systems are made are specifically about amplitude and distortion. Right. So as long as you can get 125, 135 decibels to the center seat with less than 5% distortion, you've got a good cinema system, right? Of course, for our standards, you go anywhere near 0.25% distortion and the system's broken, right? It's just broken. It's unlistenable, right?
Yeah.
So very, very different criteria, very different standards. Being able to have both is exceptional. And most people have never really experienced, even in a multi-million dollar, multi-million dollar professional cinema, the clarity that is capable, the complete the dissolution or suspension of disbelief, right? The completely being enthralled in the movie and not even thinking about where the sound's coming from or the fact that you're watching a movie at all. Those same characteristics that we look for in a good stereo system, at being able to honestly fool you into believing that there's an instrument in the room with you or that you have been transported somewhere else to some other location, right? That goes just as much, if not more so, for a really good piece of cinema. Right? And being able to have that level of detail and clarity at the same time as having that amplitude and everything else is something that most people simply have not been able to experience. Right. So, yeah, I'm right there with you in terms of, my overall listing, probably about 50-50. And when a movie is really well done, and the score's good and everything's happening properly and everything's mixed well, it has just as much, if not more, of the effect that a good stereo production has, in that you feel that enthrallment, you feel that complete immersion into what you're watching, listening to.
Oh, absolutely. It's essential because if anything that we know to judge anything by, it's people's voices.
Sure.
Like it's a huge component, maybe the biggest in terms of vocals, whether it be on music or in any other format.
Yeah, you can fool me into believing that one violin sounds like a different one, but you're never going to fool me into believing that Luke Wilmer sounds like Will Kline.
Hey, we both sound pretty good in our own right, if I dare say.
No complaints either way.
All right, man. What's going to be pricing on Vox? And then let's tackle some questions.
Yep, so we're looking at $17K for the Vox. And yeah, I would imagine we'll probably see that start to trickle into the US market in a couple of months here. But we are taking orders now. And like I mentioned, all of the other models are starting to trickle into, if not already available, at your local showroom. So feel free to make an appointment. Get your ears on these things. It is not like any other, upgrade or family that we've done. This is a significant improvement across the board. I really invite you to take a listen to it.
And I second it completely. We've already got the new Serafinos up in the Timonium showroom, so get over here and hear them because you'll know.
Beautiful.
Let's take a look at these questions. You guys had some really awesome questions tonight, by the way. I am proud of our viewers. Okay. Ed says, Luke or Will, what would be a few ideal amps to match with Sonus Faber regardless if it's the Sonetto line going up to the Homage Collection? We did touch on that a little bit, but we'll circle back to it. Really, for something like Sonetto, I'd probably look at like a Michi X3. And I'd say as you begin to climb the line, eventually Michi separates. The like Mac MA12000 is awesome on most Olympica models. And then if you ever get into Mac separates like 2700 with a 462 into Olympica Nova 5s, and that is beginning to be what you need for the Homage, if you ask me. That's really good. Will, what do you got?
Yeah, I definitely echo all of that Precisely. And obviously, this looks like a stereo system. You know, if I was ever thinking about moving, and these days I find myself recommending more often than not that you at least open yourself to the idea of eventually being able to build up into a theater system. But even then, you should have a dedicated stereo amp on your left and rights if possible. Any one of the Macintosh Michi integrators would be a fantastic combination with those. Keep in mind the Sonetto is really designed to play well with others. All right, so there's almost no amplifier combination you're going to find as long as it's a high quality amplifier that is going to be egregious in any way. All right, so we've got the impedance matching to make sure, or impedance consistency to make sure pretty much every amp is going to be able to perform at its best on this speaker. It also has the level of detail and clarity where you'll be able to actually hear the difference in quality amplifiers, in the quality of amplifiers from, you know, a $100 home theater receiver up to maybe a $50,000 stereo amp or monoblock. So you can hear each step of the way in terms of the detail and clarity. So the quality of amplifier is definitely going to be of utmost importance. But yeah, for us, the Sonetto really represents probably the utility knife of our brand. You know, it can go on a cheap home theater receiver. It can go on some of the best amplifiers in the world. It's going to be compatible. It's going to show you every bit of the way. It's going to work in as many different rooms as possible. It's an incredibly versatile line. So yeah, don't be afraid to play. Don't be afraid to mix and match. Just make sure you're getting something of worthy quality, I will say.
Yeah, and there's definitely a few things out there that do the job for the price. Like, say, for example, you wanted to do a multi-channel Sonetto system, and you couldn't really get into separates, but you could get yourself a pretty decent receiver. If you were here shopping at Gramophone, I'd probably show you something like a better Marantz and start with that. And then if you get into separates, even like the that first level Mac processor, the MX100 is awesome with one of the Mac Class D amps. Really great stuff.
Yeah, actually, that would be a pretty sick combo.
Not a question, but a fun comment. Jonathan said, wow, that graphite is amazing. Sir, I rate your eyes as functioning. Yes, the graphite is amazing.
You are correct. You are objectively correct.
Scott says, I've heard so much good about Sonus Faber speakers. So have we, and we've heard them sound really good. Never had a chance to listen to them. Oh, sir, we need to fix that. I get the impression they would be a good match for my Audiolab 6000A. Up to about a Sonetto 4, or excuse me, a Sonetto 3. There is no Sonetto 4. That's a taboo. I would say yes. The Audiolab's a good sounding little amp. It's a nice Class AB design. It's got a real power supply in there, aka toroidal, and I think that would do you well up to about a Sonetto 3. Past that point, you'd probably start to get hungry for a little bit more juice, a little bit more clarity. But very capable amp, all the way up to a $4,000 speaker. That's pretty respectable.
Yep, couldn't agree more. I've actually heard that combination. It's quite nice.
It is. I do like those little amps. Jonathan Sierra says, I need to come and listen to them again. Yes, you do. And then you need to come after that, and then you need to take home a pair. Okay, let's see. Aldite says, hey, Will, hey, Luke, I am a proud owner of the Serafinos. Should I start getting nervous and save money for the new Serafinos? Sir, do not get nervous. Get excited.
Yes, get excited. Keep in mind, when you bought those Serafinos, you bought a speaker that already had a direct upgrade that goes in just about any place the Serafinos will work in the Amati. So now you've got the great opportunity to take back any buyer's remorse you may have had about not purchasing the Amati to begin with and get the new version of the Amati. Ideally, your dealer will give you some trade-in on the Serafino. It's kind of a win-win.
Absolutely. We could definitely do a trade for you, or just depending on whatever you decide to do with those secondhand, no matter what you do, the next person to get their hands on them is still getting an incredible speaker, and you're getting much of that investment back. Because here's the great thing about hi-fi, guys. Some people look at prices of these things and go, I could buy a car for that. And I say, yeah, you could, and you shouldn't, because cars are horrible investments. High-end audio holds its value.
This is absolutely true.
Diggs from Twitch says, hey, what's up? What's right back at you? Sam has an excellent question about speaker design. Isn't horn loading better? Sam, I think I know what you're getting at here in terms of efficiency, but I've got to tell you, and there are exceptions to what I'm about to say. There is such thing as good horns. But 9 times out of 10, I really do not like horns. Now, that's just me. Will, what are your feelings on that?
Oh, I love talking about this because, horns, when I was first introduced to high-end audio, there was a pair of speakers that I wanted so bad to listen to, and they were called the avant-gardes, right? And they were just these gigantic, massive horns, right? And then, maybe 5 or 6 years into my career, I actually had an opportunity to listen to a pair, and I was so underwhelmed, right? So here's
Mm.
what horns do well, right? Horns create, especially in the higher to mid-range frequencies, a sense of presence and immediacy because they're so ridiculously efficient. Every bit of energy that that driver is creating is getting to the listener. So the tiniest little pin drop, it almost feels like you're an ant happening right next to it, right? Like it's just so much information in the most subtle of details. And that's cool. I enjoy that. The problem with a horn is you can't make a single concentric driver that handles all of the frequencies, right? And many horns will actually have an augmented subwoofer, if not a sub horn, right? So having a high frequency horn, a mid-range frequency horn, and some sort of a low frequency device means you've got separation with those different things, right? Now, certain manufacturers do a better job of integrating those signals together such that they do present what we have come to know as a soundstage, a cohesive soundstage. But almost all of them, almost 100% of the time, fail the Will Kline Leonard Cohen test. Right. So when you have a singer like Leonard Cohen, who is saying S's and T's and all of these high frequency register sounds at the same time of having a very deep and chesty voice, you've got all three of those different compartments of drivers active at the same time. And every single time Leonard Cohen shifts from one octave to another, it suddenly sounds like he's either coming from here or there, or separating into two different Leonard Cohens and coming from both places. You can never
Mm.
get a cohesive soundstage for an instrument that has a multitude of frequencies, that has a wide frequency range, right? So for a lot of things, if you've got, triangles over here and a timpani drum over here and a stand-up bass over there, sounds fine, sounds great, nice immediacy, good integration. But as soon as you've got a single instrument, like the human voice, that transiates lots of different frequency, it falls apart. Horn speakers completely fall apart.
Yeah, that's been my experience too. To give you like a personal anecdote, last time I went to a movie theater, I went and saw the new Batman movie. The whole movie, I felt like, man, voices just sound wrong. I can barely understand what they're saying, and by the end of it, my ears were ringing.
Mm.
Lights come on, I look up, and what do I see? Basic, very basic looking horn speakers everywhere, and I was just like, I wish I didn't spend the $20. I really felt that way.
Right. So
And
yeah, again, the design criteria is to be able to hit a certain volume amplitude at a certain seat, and horns will absolutely help you do that. But obviously, there are some compromises.
oh yeah, and like yeah, it was loud. Oh, it was plenty loud. But honestly, that was kind of part of the problem. It was so loud and so distorted, it hurt. Now we
Exactly.
got to be careful here. Not every horn is bad. I have heard amazing horns,
No, in
but they've
fact,
all been very
lots of horn manufacturers make absolutely exceptional speakers that are really, really
yes.
fun to listen to. And really, the downfall that I mentioned is it's a thing for me. It's kind of like on old DLP projectors where they had the rainbow thing. Remember that? Where you'd have like a white line in the middle of the screen, and if you move your eyes fast enough left and right, you could actually see that line break apart
Yep.
into its constituent parts. Right? The first time I saw that, I decided I could never own a DLP projector. Most people, doesn't bother them at all. Right. So to each their own. Everybody's got their own thing.
Absolutely. And I will tell you this, the horns that I really enjoyed were extremely esoteric, very rare, very big, and make everything we talked about tonight look downright accessible in terms of price. Michael says, I'm late, glad you're still alive. Well, so are we, man. We are going a little bit later than usual here, but that's because we're talking about stuff we really, really love. And you had a question right after that. NADM 10, where would that top out in regards to Sonus Faber floor standing speakers? Excellent question. I have a pretty fair amount of experience with the N10, M10. It is a great little sounding amp, especially considering you get room correction built in, which is very fun. And it is very clean sounding, therefore it kind of just lets the speaker do what it does, which in the case of Sonus Faber is an excellent thing. It does tend to run out of steam, though, when you start to really ask of it power-wise, though for its tiny little diminutive size, it certainly deserves some credit. I'd say I'd start to look for just simply more oomph right around the time you get to about a Sonetto 5 or 8. What do you think, Will?
That's exactly what I was going to say. And so, yeah, I mean, I like the antenna, especially the technology behind it. I love the interface. I love what NAD's done in that whole platform. It's really, really cool stuff. But yeah, it's one downfall, and it's, they're never going to tell you this is a powerful amplifier, right? It's one downfall is it doesn't quite have enough power, especially when you get to that full range, you get to those lower registers. It'll reach the volume levels that you need to for most music, things like that. But what you're going to find with a major or what you're going to find as a major detriment is anytime you're trying to fill a large space with consistent sound, or anytime you've got a piece of music that is very full range, you're going to hear that N10 just kind of run out of juice.
Yeah, that's what I've found. But it's a good sounding little amp, and there's certainly some Sonus Faber pairings that'll do very well, by all means.
Yep, absolutely. And for the money, it's ridiculous.
Yes, it really is, especially as you get the rack in there too, just helping you deal with any room issues, particularly from about 300 hertz down. Oof, fixes that up nice.
And then it can actually also help you with the power allotment. So if you do have a troublesome room, you run that die rack, and it'll actually divert the amount of power it does have to the frequencies where it makes the most difference. So that can actually help.
Yeah, because now you might not be just throwing entire cannons worth of energy at base where you actually don't want it.
Exactly right.
I think this was Mike again, just on his YouTube account instead of Facebook. Same question, but he did add, what about Lumina 5s? Of course, we covered that, though. I think you can get into Sonettos a little bit with an M10. Heck, I've even hooked an M10 up to a Nova 2. It made it run out of steam eventually, but at lower levels, it was still respectable.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And for something like that, when we're talking about basically taking either of the components or any number of the components to their theoretical limits, I always recommend try to figure out a way to get yourself a demo. If you've got an M10 and you've got a store that doesn't, bring it in. If they've got one there, call ahead of time, ask them to set up a couple of combinations for you, and really just listen to what we're talking about, right? Because again, certain people are going to be far more sensitive to it than we are, as cats that are up to our elbows in this stuff.
And I think we got one more question that came in here. In fact, I actually may have jumped over this one, so sorry about that, Mark. For Mark Mann, hey y'all, I own the original Amati Futura. Oh boy,
we got a speaker.
Oh man, we got one of the alumni here with us tonight. I use still point ultra 5-footers, but this requires removal of the spikes and rake design. How important is the rake in this particular design? Will, I'm going to hand that one right to you because you have more experience with the older models.
That's a tricky. So folks that are not familiar, many of the Sonus Faber speakers of days of yore actually had an angle back, what we call a rake back, right? So just naturally sat, kind of facing the sky a little bit. And this was basically done to address the issue of timing between the different drivers. All right, and the way this was done on the Amati Futura is there were spikes on the front that were actually significantly longer than the spikes in the back. So he's talking about replacing them with a third-party spike, which does tend to have really, really good results. I've actually used those; they work very well. Unfortunately, they're not going to make two different sizes that are in the same proportions to allow for that same rake angle. And unfortunately, I have to tell you, that rake angle is incredibly, incredibly important in that speaker, right? You're talking about the time delays between the mid-range and the tweeter. So I would try it, The sonic benefits of using a third-party feed, quieter noise floor. You tend to get more solidity in the bass. You tend to get less distortion throughout the entire system because you're sending less vibration to your componentry. And it just tends to be more consistent and solid, right? So I do recommend using them when it makes sense. But if you're not able to find ones that are at least close in the relative distance to each other, you may find that the detriment is actually larger than the benefit. And what you're listening for there is a sense of three-dimensionality, the size of your rendered soundstage, right? Because a lot of times when you change your rake angle, you'll actually squeeze the sides of the soundstage together in the horizontal domain, and really just see if the differences that you make are acceptable in comparison to the improvements that you're certainly going to make with the new feet.
Oh yeah, I have a little bit of experience, not with the original Amatis, but with some speakers that are designed around having a certain rake, and we're talking like just small, like 3 degrees, tiny. But it is, take that 3 degrees, but the speaker's 10, 12, 14 feet away from you, that becomes a big difference. And that's precisely what certain speaker designs, just like Will said, are going for, to make sure a certain frequency arrives pinpoint to your ear, generally regarding like tweeters and mid-ranges. So you want to make sure you can nail that figure.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. And when we talk about the relationship and the time domain between two drivers, it is wave dependent, right? So you may find that there's places that work that are significantly different than the original relative distance to themselves or to the listener, right? So if we're talking about tweeter and the mid-range driver, right? This is obviously going to work because this is how the speaker was designed, right? So it was designed to use across this rake angle. So going all the way forward doesn't necessarily mean that it won't work, but it's something that you'll need to experiment with because you're dramatically changing that distance. And you may find another distance that actually locks into place that actually works. And so I would definitely try it out and see what you get. But in my experience, the Amatis do like their rake angle. That's pretty important. Now, that's the old version. The newer versions, almost completely perfectly upright. All right, so all of that delay that we used to do in the physical domain, we can actually do all in the wiring and crossover network now. And we find that an upright speaker gives you more placement options, right? And will tend to damage your wall because if it does slide back into the wall or somebody bumps it, the feet are going to hit the floorboard before the speaker hits the wall.
Yeah, generally speakers that don't require a rake, unless it's very subtle, behave a little bit easier in any given room just because you're not dealing with angles. And with, like Will described, being able to do things in the internals of the speaker or things like the phase plug, for example, we're seeing less and less examples of rake, or at least any exaggerated levels of it in most modern speakers. Another quick one we'll cover, and then we're going to get ready to wrap up here. But Mike wrote in again. Thanks for the info. You're welcome, Mike. Has inventory of Sonus Faber gotten better as far as availability for some of the more affordable models? The short answer is yes.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you say that on the dealer side because we've certainly been doing our very best to wrangle it on the manufacturing side. But yeah, I mean, we're seeing significant efficiencies back in the railways and in the shipping systems, everything like that, starting to kind of clear up a little bit. Obviously, the cost of lumber has plummeted significantly, so that was something that caused a little bit of delays for us being able to source the quality of lumber that we needed. Yeah, that was nuts.
Expensive wood was like
lumber was trading like meme coins for a little.
Oh, I know, right?
And then, most of the other inefficiencies that were just a matter of, global events and whatnot have kind of reduced. And we have not stopped building in the Bear, right? So we have expanded our existing factory. We've purchased a new cabinet maker, another piece of real estate to move everything into. We're making major improvements and expansions during these kind of quieter times. So it's been good for us. But yes, to answer your question, availability of product has gotten significantly better in the last 3 or 4 months.
And on our end of things, we've got a pretty significant stock of Sonus Faber we are actually sitting on right now. So it's likely we'd have what you want already. Yeah,
you guys, looking at the 300 or so dealers we have throughout North America, you guys might have the most Sonus Faber in stock of any dealer.
Oh yeah, we looked forward and bought a whole lot of it because people love it. We want to have it. If that doesn't tell you something about just how special Sonus Faber is, the fact that it is what we have the most stock of out of anything right now, that should tell you something.
That is huge. That is huge. Gramophone is certainly a store that can carry absolutely any brand they choose to.
We intend to, and Sonus Faber's been it, man. It's been it for our customers. Like,
well, we certainly appreciate.
What do people want? They take home what they want, and they take home Sonus Faber. All right, man, we're going to get ready to wrap up here. So, guys, thank you for sticking around for so long. I know this one went a little bit longer than usual, and by a little bit, I mean we probably set a new record. But hey, this is one of the most exciting launches that I think I've had to be able to cover on live stream. At least the one that, I hope I don't get in trouble for this one, I've been most excited about having, because the Homage series is just, it's one of my references. It's one of my favorites. It always will be.
We certainly appreciate that. It's a lot of fun for us because it's like, not only are we at Sonus Faber dedicated and passionate about what we do. We're also fans of our own brand, and were before we got started with it. And Sonus Faber is long enough. It's been around long enough now. We're looking at maybe the third generation of folks moving into the staff, and it's just been beautiful to see the power that Sonus Faber has had at being able to cultivate the next generation of Sonus Faber. Right, like I said, it kind of this multiplicative effect. So I couldn't be happier, and it's really great to talk to somebody who enjoys it and is as passionate as I am. And I just feel really lucky to work in an industry where I get to talk about stuff that I truly love with people that I enjoy talking with it about too.
And that's one thing I love too. Like we love the audio, we love the gear, obviously the stuff, but the people just enrich it that much more. This is an industry that I think is exceptional in its level of passion and just quality of people in it.
Absolutely. So if you have any other questions about the brand or any of the new products, check out the new page that we just popped up on sonusfaber.com. And of course, if you'd like to take a listen to select models of the Homage, contact your local dealer. If you happen to be in the Maryland area, please go and see my friends at Gramophone. They're one of the best stores on the planet.
Thanks, man. That means a lot. We do our best, and we love having you guys, whether it's like this or especially when you're in town, even better. Oh, by the way, I've been told to tell you to get over here so we can all hang out. That came from like everyone on the sales staff.
Will too. Going to have quite the tour, checking out, kind of demonstrating these new products. But yeah, I think we've got something on the books to come out and do a training for you guys. So I will see you then.
That'll be fun. Those are always good days. All right, everybody. So we're going to wrap her up here. Keep in mind, this new Homage line, it is out. It is ready to go. This was the launch, and we may have very well been the first in the nation to get an example on display, and that is the new Serafino, already up in the Timonium showroom. So come see it. Better yet, come hear it, just because you must. It's magic. It's lightning in a bottle. And of course, we got the location here at Timonium. We got Columbia. We've got Gaithersburg. And we should have more of this product coming to those showrooms soon as well. But we're already got it in Timonium. So come here for now. But it is coming everywhere else. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to hang out with us on social media and follow us there, because we're putting up some nice photos of systems that we'll be doing with these speakers, which, hey, it's always fun to look at pretty systems. So don't miss out on that too. As always, guys, thanks for watching. Will, thank you for being here. Guys, don't forget to thank Will. He's the man. And both of us, I'm sure, again, will be seeing you.